anything we need to go over before we start? Then let's call this meeting to order at, I believe, 5:34. First item on the agenda is the agenda. Do I hear any need for changes to the agenda? Bob Fish has moved to approve the agenda. Second. Kurt's given us the second. I'm sorry, was it Kurt or Brian?
I did.
Kurt. Thank you. Call for vote. Approved? Opposed? Unanimous? We have approved the agenda. Are there any announcements?
I would just like you all to know that your handhelds, we ran through and did a check. We replaced some this afternoon. So if you push that bottom left button and hold it, hopefully the handhelds will be working as well.
Excellent. Okay. On to the old business, the list of potential interview candidates. As everyone is aware.
How about the approval of the minutes?
I'm sorry, thank you. I skipped the approval of the minutes. May 26th minutes. Any comments? Changes? Do I hear a motion to approve?
I move that we approve the minutes as submitted.
Bob Fish. Do I hear a second?
Brian seconded.
Brian seconded. Brian Cleary. Call for vote. Approval of minutes. Opposed? It's unanimous. Now we move on to the list of potential interview candidates. As you're all, I hope, aware, Bob Fish is taking the point on gathering up the list of candidates. Send any of your candidate lists, send a candidate request to Bob. Give him your people and the reasons you want them included. He'll present that next week, where we'll be able to discuss all of them and vote on individual. Just a reminder, we haven't been doing it with this one. Don't enter into discussions on email. Discussions must take place here where it's open public meetings. The next item is the schedule. Brian made up the...
Could I ask for clarification? We have an item later in the agenda that talks about next meeting and what we're going to do. How is that different than schedule? Or is this talking about the whole year?
This is just talking about the general schedule. If there's any issues that have come up, Brian had presented a preliminary schedule. We were going to go over each week, we were going to go over the next couple of weeks' actual interviews and set it down in stone. But as far as just the generic idea of the schedule, if there's any issues or questions that are coming up, we know that we can't meet on the 16th. They're redoing the audio here. Other than that, anything that anyone needs to bring up? Okay. We can move on to the new business. We have an amended set of bylaws that were presented today. I believe that's what was just passed out this evening. Any comments on the amended bylaws?
I had one minor terminology. Article 4 under membership, Section 5. It uses the term office, and I think that could be misconstrued in light of Section 4 talking about the removal of officers. Suggest replacing that with position. And there's two instances there. Well, three.
So you said Article 4, Section 5, you said?
Right, it's on page 2 at the top, second paragraph. Yeah, upon the resignation or removal from the position of a commissioner, the vacant position shall be filled is what I'm recommending. Because we're not really talking about the removal of at least I don't think we're talking about the removal of officers. Brian, maybe you can clarify?
Under the Idaho code that sets up optional forms of government commission, the definition of an officer includes, you know,
The members of the commission.
Yeah.
I know, I was just thinking to clarify that this is distinct from what section 4 is referring to. I was, we'll see if this is working. Oh, good. So I was thinking that section 4 and section 5 were, section 4 was specific to the officers of chair, vice chair, secretary. Section 5 is talking about any member of the commission, if they should drop out, for example.
yeah. So was your edit that upon the resignation or removal from, instead of office,
Yeah, just the position of, on the
of the
commission.
position of a commissioner?
Right, the vacant position should be filled with the alternate.
I don't have any objection to that. Anybody else?
Anyone else have an objection to that? Change office to position?
Just position, not, just position.
Right, yeah, use the term position there. There's 3 places in that same sentence.
Paragraph, section 5, paragraph, it occurs 3 times. Office would be replaced all 3 times it occurs in section 5.
Right, yeah, I think there may be slight grammatical tweak to make it fit in 1 or 2 of those places, but
So it would now read section 5 as edited, as proposed to be edited. It would read Article 4, section 5, upon the resignation or removal from the position of as a commissioner, the vacant position shall be filled by the alternate selected by the same county commissioner as the late position holder.
yes.
Yep.
Is everyone clear on that modification? Okay. Further comments?
I move we approve the bylaws of the county optional forms of government as amended. Motion.
Bob Fish has given the motion. Phil Ward has seconded. Call for vote. Approve. Looks unanimous. The bylaws as amended have been approved.
So just a point of clarification on that approval, just I'm going to strike out at the top the reference to May 26, 2021 draft revision 1.1 on 6/2/21.
Yes.
And I'm just going to insert at the top approved 6/2/21.
Excellent.
Okay. And then I'll email that back out to the group, Nancy, et cetera, and the study commissioners.
And Nancy, you'll post that then once it's emailed out.
Okay.
Excellent. Okay. Next item is the election of officers. We have 3 temporary officers, interim officers, and we now need to elect new officers or re-elect the same, whatever. Do I hear anything on the office of chair? Volunteers?
I move that Dave Botting be made chairman of the board.
Bob Fish has made a motion.
Second.
It has been seconded by Phil Ward.
Got it before me.
I appreciate it, Phil. I apologize. I should know that, but. Okay, anyone else? Volunteers, nominations? I hear crickets. Is the floor closed? Call for election. Approved? Okay, looks unanimous. Vice Chair, the current Vice Chair is Bruce.
Brian,
I'm sorry, Brian. Why do I do that to you, Brian?
I don't know.
Current Vice Chair is Brian Cleary. Do I hear any nominations or volunteers for Vice Chair?
I'll volunteer again to serve in that role.
Okay.
I'm willing to volunteer as well for the role.
Okay, we have 2 volunteers for the role. Any third? Looks like the floor is closed. Okay, Brian Cleary, not Bruce, for vice chair. In favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Looks like we have 6. Kurt, in favor? You're not going to vote, Kurt? You're abstaining. We have a majority for Brian Cleary as vice chair. Secretary currently is David Levine. Do I hear volunteers or nominations?
I nominate Dave as secretary, right?
Yes.
Can we just go back 1 second to the vice chair? I didn't get the motion in a second. Who made the motion?
We didn't have any motions. We had 2 volunteers.
So you don't need a motion?
No, we voted.
Thank you.
I believe Dave was too occupied
Oh,
with
I'm sorry.
trying to catch up here.
Vice chair.
Secretary?
I'm just trying to get the notes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be secretary.
Okay, any other volunteers? Floor is closed. In favor? Opposed? You have it unanimously, David. Yep. I'm going to give Dave a chance to catch up here real
I
briefly.
got it.
You got it? Okay.
It's a lot easier without motions and seconds.
Brian, we have the Idaho Code as the next item.
Sure. Can I ask Nancy to do some magic and project the presentation I put together? Hopefully that works seamlessly.
Say something.
Great. So, per the last meeting, I had volunteered to just try and put together a few slides that would facilitate our discussion of these various sections that are listed in the agenda for this evening. And so with that goal in mind, I turn to the slides and just, remind folks out there that, we're sitting here exploring the idea of optional forms of county government. This is these options are defined under Idaho Code. It's not that this study commission can just at whim come up with its vision for what the government should look like. It actually has to follow several options under the code. But before we get into what those options are, just a moment to just dwell on, how county government functions are set up within the state of Idaho. This is a Dillon rule state, not a home rule state, so the functions of county government are really the arms and the legs. The body is the state that directs what can happen, and the county serves as those arms and legs to carry out those functions. This slide number 2 that I have up seeks to diagram what that is, the county government functions. It's really a dual function. It's an arm of state government in administering elections, enforcing state laws, performing state-mandated functions. And it's also a unit of local government and serves to meet local health, welfare, agricultural services, public works, planning, parks, and recreation. A little bit about what the government is today. This shouldn't be unfamiliar to anybody, but this is the existing county government structure. It's an elected 3-member board and other officials elected as well. And you can see the breakdown. The board has, as I noted, executive and legislative authority. They adopt a budget. They levy county taxes. They enact ordinances. They do have some authority within the existing 3-board structure to just, if they should choose, to appoint administrative assistants or one member of the 3-member board to act as an administrator. So they have that flexibility within the existing 3-commissioner structure. Board members are elected at biennial election. One member is elected for a 2-year term. One member is elected for a 4-year term in those biennial election cycles. And if you were to switch to an optional form of county government, that could supersede this type of arrangement and go to something not exceeding 4 years. So that's a little bit about our existing form of county government as it's set up. The citizens directly elect the commissioners, and each of these functionaries, officials, assessor, clerk, coroner, prosecutor, sheriff, and treasurer. The next slide, slide number 4, takes us to one of the optional forms. This is Idaho Code, section 315401 is the opening provision. I didn't lead to the end provision, but it starts at Idaho Code 315401. That still provides for 3 elected commissioners. They still have the same executive and legislative authority functions, but they can change their terms to 4 years if that's voter approved. It has to be approved by the voters. There's some other options, though, within that 3-member board with changes in other county offices. Other elected officials, the treasurer, the assessor, these other officials I noted earlier, they can be appointed by the board if approved by the voters. It has to be approved by the voters. They can establish different terms of office. Can't exceed 4 years, but they can change within that, the terms of office. They can also eliminate positions as well. And important to note, though, that the duties of the county to act as the arms and the leg in administering, what the state law directs, those duties don't go away. You might be able to eliminate an office, but you don't lose any of the duties. So somebody's got to do it. So they also can separate the duties of the treasurer and clerk into separate offices if so desired. So that's just a little synopsis of a 3-member board with changes in the other forms of county offices. In that structure, one of the things that would jump out at someone would be, if approved by the voters, you actually could eliminate election of some or all of those currently elected positions outside the board. Those are things to consider along the journey we're on. Another optional form that's set out in Idaho Code sections 315501 to 5511 is what's known as a 5-member board of commissioners. Interesting, that 5 board commissioners as provided in Idaho Code would have 2- and 4-year terms on rotational basis with biennial election cycles. Again, the executive and legislative authority resides in the commission, but they can use a 3-member executive board that's chosen by the 5-member board as a whole. So you can condense some of those functions or board functions into 3 members if approved by all 5. Same as the other structures where the board can appoint administrative assistants or a member of the board to act as an administrator. So not much change from some of these 2 prior discussed provisions. They can change from a 2- and 4-year term rotational election cycle to just all 4 years if the voters approve that. And with 5 commissioners, you're getting it has representational implications. So districts are redrawn, so populations are as nearly equal as possible. That just makes sense. You don't want to weight one versus another. So on the elected official side, beyond the board.
Brian?
Right? Yeah, I'm sorry, Dave. Go ahead.
Does that mean that if you go to a 5-commissioner option, you have to redraw the district? So it's,
You're going to need to redraw the districts, yeah.
right,
But you can have county-wide elections without districts. Is that not correct?
Right.
I guess we'd have to
I
look
think
into
that's
that.
the clarification we're getting at. Can they be at large?
That's a good question.
I didn't see anything in the statute that talked about them being at large, but it doesn't mean it wouldn't be possible.
I could double check the question and come back to you, but I don't know the answer. So,
Because in theory, we could move, I mean, if that was possible, we could change the 3 to be at large as well, right?
So I'm going to make a note of that. I'll come back and clarify on that. But within that 5-member board optional forum, as to the elected officials other than board members, right? If those members, one or more of those elected officials, right, is appointed versus elected, they could be appointed by the board or the executive board, this 3 core member board, right, with advice and consent of the entire board. And they are supervised by the entire board or the executive board. So there's these options within here. 7-member board of commissioners, which is set out in Idaho Code 315601 to 5611. Very similar to 5. It's got 7 commissioners as opposed to 5. Same concept of a 2- and 4-year term on rotation by biennial election, but that can be changed if the voters approve it. Could be 4 years. Same thing exists as to all the other structures where executive and legislative authority sits with the Board of Commissioners. And they can choose executive board of 3 members, again, here. So they've moved to a 7-member board, but they still can have a core of a executive board of 3. They can appoint administrative assistants or members of the board to serve as an administrator, not unlike the other forms that we've discussed. And again, the districts are redrawn, so populations are nearly as equal as possible, and I would have to follow up and clarify as to the other question. And as to elected officials other than the commissioners, same thing about if they're appointed, right? Appointed by the board or the executive board with advice and consent of the entire board, supervised by the entire board or the executive board. Those are options that you can consider within that form. So that's 7-member board. Now we move into what is, this optional form set forth in Idaho Code 315201 to 5214. It requires quite a few sections to describe compared to the other ones, but there's a lot there. And I'm sorry. Yeah.
We don't have a copy of that.
Yeah, only the first 3 pages were in the handout, 6 slides.
I might just, can you guys work from the screen? Do you mind working from the screen?
Absolutely. It would just be nice to have a copy for.
I'm sorry about that.
reference, but that's
And
fine.
this is my fault, not Nancy's fault. I emailed this to her kind of late. I was tweaking this thing at the last minute. And so she did me a great favor by printing what she did print, getting it to y'all. So this is having a commission executive. Now, this is an elected executive format under this structure, right? And there's some salient features. Can you see the full slide there? You should be able to. Becomes the chief administrative officer, becomes the county budget officer, responsible for the annual budget. That elected executive can appoint administrative assistant. Annual report on state of the county with recommendations. That executive ensures faithful execution and compliance with ordinances. Presides over the board. Now, for those people watching online, looking at this slide and focusing on it, just because it says commission executive doesn't mean the board goes away, right? This is a commission executive that is elected as well as the board being elected, right? So, however, that commission executive presides over board meetings, participates in discussions, and makes recommendations. That executive can veto ordinances and budget resolutions. Has executive authority and supervision of county personnel, can appoint, supervise, suspend, remove personnel, and make nominations and appointments to additional offices, advisory boards, and commissions. So this is a quite a reservoir of authority. as one might observe. So you can, within this commission executive, looking to the right side of the slide now, in the top right quadrant, as I noted, the board doesn't go away, and you can have options there of 3, 5, or 7 member boards, like we discussed earlier about those kind of permutations of a board of commissioners. They still retain the legislative authority. They can override an executive veto by that elected executive. It needs a 2/3 vote by that board to do it. And again, 2 or 4 year terms of those board members, or by the electorate approving, could be all 4 year. Elected officials, it's the same options. If appointed, if it becomes that they're appointed, the executive appoints with advice and consent of the board, and those officials are supervised by the executive. And this could be one or more of those other type officials. So that's kind of the commission executive function option. There is another optional form called the commission manager. This is Idaho Code 60, Section 31, 5301 through 5312. In this form, there's a board of 3, 5, or 7 elected members, same kind of structures that we've explored in these other options. There's an appointed manager, meaning the board appoints them, right? That becomes the administrative head of the county, the budget officer for the annual budget, ensures ordinance compliance and execution, attends board meetings, participates in discussions and makes recommendations, but no vote. Has executive authority over or supervision of county personnel, can appoint, supervise, suspend, remove personnel, and make nominations and appointments to advisory boards and committees. And as to the other officials besides board members, the other elected officials, you get the same options, where if they became appointed, the manager appoints with advice and consent of the board and supervised by the manager. I'm sorry, did you have a question?
Brian, I just wanted clarification. By appointed, while that's the terminology that's used, it is translated to hired.
If appointed, you mean the elected official? Yes, that effectively is correct, I believe. You know, the commissioners appoint, but essentially you're being hired.
Okay.
Right?
There's a distinction there. You know, appoint kind of gives you the impression that they can pick their neighbor and say, hey, would you be the whatever? The hired implies that there are standards, a job description, position description, and there's a process.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the position is defined in statute, so I don't know that, I mean, while you might pick your neighbor and appoint them to the position, they have to fulfill the requirements by statute, and it would be paid, but does that mean that they're I mean,
They're an employee.
they're an employee of the county, yeah.
Right. I just wanted to make that clarification for anyone listening.
Sure.
Because there's
it's
a
good. So it doesn't
distinct
sound like
difference between
nepotism.
appointed versus hired.
Right,
Okay.
Yeah. That word appointed has, I understand what your concern is, that the public may hear that and think nepotism or all the other things that we worry about in government, right? But no, that they become hired or an employee. So, and then here's some, I shouldn't characterize them, but I was gonna say these are kind of outliers, as we've kind of said, but we're considering all options here. None are off the table. But, you know, just by my characterization, it does suggest, you know, this optional form, there's a consolidation of offices in sections 31, 5701, and 5703. That's where 2 or more counties consolidate one or more of the county offices other than the office of commissioner, okay? Consolidation is approved if a majority of voters from each county approve the measure. So this is more than just one county's commissioners putting something on the ballot. You're going to have somebody in some other county have a study commission, I suppose, or a petition for an optional form of government that turns to this. And that's just a little hard, from my humble mind, to conceive that's going to happen simultaneously in two counties. So, but we should consider it. You never know. Then there's the charter form. This is provided for in Idaho Code sections 315801 to 5709. You form a charter commission to draft a charter for the county. Commission has 4 years to draft the charter or it's dissolved. And the proposed charter is submitted to electors at a general election. And this sounds like some real yeoman's work, whoever would be appointed to a charter commission. But again, we should not rule it out. We should give it due consideration equally with all the other forms. So with that, the purpose of this was merely to facilitate our discussion into each of these sections and our beginning of our thought process about these options. It was not meant to be a definitive recitation of Idaho Code, just kind of a skim across the top. So I hope it was informative and served the purpose of facilitating discussion.
Yes, I thank you, Brian. I would like to point out, in answer to the question that was raised earlier, and I'm sorry I'm not speaking into the microphone, that's my fault. Section 315502, Board of County Commissioners, Section 3, I believe it's the last sentence here. If approved by the electors, the commissioner for each additional district shall be elected to a term of 4 years, and commissioners for existing districts shall be elected to a term of 4 years upon the expiration of the commissioner's current term. So I believe, based on that, that they would have to be district, not at large. Certainly. Yes, so let districts to be redrawn as part of the title of that, yes.
Dave, I have a question.
Yes, John.
For a point of clarification on the 3, 5, and 7 member options, those people that are currently elected, those other officers, can still remain elected. It's just an option to have them appointed. Is that correct?
Was that a question to me?
Yes,
Yeah,
or to anyone.
they do serve out the remainder of their term, if I'm reading the Idaho Code correctly. Those who are existing commissioners.
No, I'm not talking about commissioners. I'm talking
The
about.
officers, the row officers too, yes. They serve out the remainder of their terms.
But they don't have to be appointed. They can remain elected positions, correct?
Yes, we have, within our options, they can remain, and you can mix them as you please, appoint, employ versus elect, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that, so.
So, in fact, in 2012, when the Kootenai County Commissioners put up on ballot an optional form of government, the way that they did that, I forget how many commissioners they went to. I think it was 5.
No, they stayed with 3.
3?
The study commission had recommended 5. In
Yeah.
2012, they stayed with 3. The study commission in 96, 97 had recommended going to 5 commissioners.
Right.
But then when the ballot proposal was put on in 2012, it was 3 commissioners and changing the row officers so that only the sheriff and prosecutor were elected and the others were to be appointed.
So it could be any combination or mix thereof. Okay, thanks.
So that's just an example of that mix.
Brian, Mike.
Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead. You were not speaking into the mic.
So that would be that 2012 ballot provision. That is a good example of the kind of thing you're talking about. You're not locked into just this one thing.
Thank you.
Hey, Brian, can you go back to that slide? I think it's the executive form of government, the one that's elected on the left, and that one
The
there.
commission executive?
Yeah, commission executive. I'm not sure I totally comprehended that.
The way I thought about it is that it is similar to the division of labor between the president and the Congress. So the president is the executive, Congress is the legislative role. in this model, the executive also serves as kind of the chair for the board, presiding over the board the similar way that the vice president presides over the Senate.
So when it's elected, that's what I'm trying to understand.
It's just like you elect the president.
Right.
You elect your
So
representative.
ballot would be executive position, someone would run for that. Someone would then also run for the commissioners.
Correct.
And the elected official, executive, has really the authority, and they can overturn that with 2/3 of the vote,
Just like,
just like the Congress can.
yeah, just like
Got it.
Congress can override a veto.
That's a great way of explaining it. Thank you.
Can we get copies of these last slides we didn't get? Thanks.
Sure. They will be posted on the public website, is my understanding as well, so the public has them.
Excellent. Any other questions to start here? Yes, Chris.
Is this working?
Yes, Phil?
Okay. I think something came up earlier, and I don't want to be like beating a dead horse, but district definition is very important. Lots of places, they'll have districts, but people elected countywide. And what that does, it dilutes the voting authority of the people in the district. So under the executive system we have here, the executive is like a strong mayor on steroids. That person can do just about anything, and it's pretty hard to stop that person, short of a special meeting called to veto the specific act, to override the veto, called specifically to do that, that function. And I think as part of whatever we decide here, we need to decide, okay, if we're going to wind up with commissions and districts, the districts need to be defined. The person running must reside in the district and be voted from that district, whereas the executive would run countywide because actually that person is overseeing the entire county. One other thing that Kristen brought up, the only place that I saw in reading through this where there were qualifications for anyone was the appointment of a manager in a council manager form, where he has to have education requirements, experience, and so on. Every place else, it kind of leaves it to anyone to say, yeah, they have the qualification. And I think if we go in that direction, we need to set some more qualifications in that area as well.
I'm not sure that's within our purview. And I think the thing you refer to about the commissioners residing in the district, I believe that's in the statute. I don't think that's...
It's my understanding that the only problem with what you suggested is that all commissioner elections are at large countywide. I don't necessarily disagree with what you say about preferring to elect them within the district exclusively, but I believe that the elections are countywide, and I don't think we have the ability to change that. Other questions? I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I would like to go over section by section and make sure there are no questions on any of these sections. This is important. This is the only reason we're here tonight and every other night. Whatever we decide to recommend, and that's all we can do is recommend, whatever we decide to recommend, we have to be in compliance with this. So if there's any questions, under the first section, the general provisions, if everyone has read that, are there any questions, any issues of understanding? 3150.
While it's fair to go through and ask for questions, I think that as we research this over time, the questions may emerge that people are just not aware of right now. So I don't know how thoroughly we need to pry bits and pieces out of people's heads at this point, Dave.
Okay. We have a little disagreement here between Kurt and myself. As
I think it's fair to go through, but I don't
think it's important that
think
we
we're gonna get all
all
the
understand
questions out.
exactly what our limitations are. As Phil brought up, he would like to see district-wide elections. I think we're stuck with countywide elections. I I just want to be sure, before we get into this and start discussing things that aren't possible, that we know what is within our purview, and we keep to the subject. We have a lot to do if we're going to make these choices. Should this office be appointed or elected? If we're appointing them, should we be recommending certain qualifications or not? It's my understanding the only elected position that there's a qualification for is the prosecuting attorney. That has to be an attorney. The coroner does not have to be a medical professional. The sheriff does not have to be a law enforcement professional, et cetera, et cetera. The clerk can be someone who is illiterate, as far as that's concerned. I'm not saying they're running, but there is no qualification that they need to be literate. They need to be 21 years old and reside in the county. So if we're going to be looking at this, it's important that we know what we're looking at, and we're not getting lost going down some rabbit hole here.
I think that's fair, but at the same time, we do have the statute that we can refer back to if we have questions along the way.
Does anyone have an issue with going over it, or does anyone want to go over it? Comments?
Really like to have a definitive judgment on what you brought up about district elections countywide.
It needs to point at your mouth.
It's very directional. You have to point it right in.
Does this work?
Yep.
Wow. Okay. I would look forward to a definitive judgment on whether we have district-wide or county-wide and district elections. And I was surprised to hear that we may not have that option in this case.
Would either of our legal experts care to speak about this?
Was this a question about whether, well, why don't you rephrase the question? I'm sorry. I just didn't catch it.
Well, the simplest part is everybody is county-wide election, but many places have, like in a county, people would be elected in the district that they reside in.
Right, so at large versus by district type election. You'd like a definitive answer as to which of the two is applicable in Kootenai County,
I think he's asking if we have a choice.
if we have a choice to make a recommendation in that fashion. I'll continue to work on that problem as we're moving through tonight, and I'll see if I can come up with the definitive answer you seek.
Thank you, Brian.
Not to put everything on Brian, but couldn't the city attorney provide a little input here too? I mean, the county attorney, I'm sorry?
We may have to turn to him on this. We have a form for requesting information, requesting a decision. And if we can't come up with something, we may have to go to him. I'm sure there is a section, and I do not know what it is because it's not one part of what we have here, that actually specifies how county commissioners are elected. And if it says at large, or if it says by district, or if it gives a choice, we'd have to find that, and that would tell us what the answer was.
Dave, could someone tell me at least, if I'm the only one who now is very, very confused, what is it like now? We have 3 commissioners, we have 3 districts. When voters go to the polls, they're voting for all 3, even though each commissioner represents a district.
Yes, it's my understanding that you are correct. The elections for commissioners are countywide or at large,
Right.
rather than by district.
I just wanted to clarify that.
So would that be true of all of these optional forms where it specifically states in statute that a district would have to be redrawn? And I understand that part of it, but could the election also be at large?
It's my understanding that that is the case, that we would be redrawing districts and following the current pattern of elections at large. But if, as I say, there is going to be a section of the code somewhere that says how these commissioners are elected. And if we get our hands on that, we'll know exactly, but right now we don't have that in front of us. The 3151 has to do with the study commission itself. I'm going to go quickly over that unless there's any issues that someone wants to bring up, because we have the big ones. 3152 is the executive form of county commission. I think Ryan did a very good job of presenting that. The kicker there is the executive is elected, and as an elected official, carries a great deal of weight. The next one, the commission manager form, 3153, basically gives the same workload to the manager, but does not give the manager the same authority. That manager is appointed and can be removed by the commission. The executive cannot be removed by the commission. They are elected, and they are going to stay there until the next election or a recall. The next three, 54, 55, and 56, all deal with the number of members of the commission, 3, 5, or 7. In all of these 5 cases, all of the row officials are either going to be elected or appointed, and that will also be part of our recommendation. If we suggest that they be appointed, if we recommend that they be appointed, if we recommend that they be elected, that's something we need to get into the weeds and discuss what we want to recommend as we get down the pike. First, we need to get into the information. Tonight, the information is, what is the statute? What are we allowed to do? What are we required to do? The next number of months, we'll be talking to people who actually are out there doing the job, finding out from them what their job is, what they see as the strengths and weaknesses. And then once we've gathered the information, then we can sit down and talk about what we think the recommendation should be. And I think that's going to be a very interesting conversation. Yes, Tamara.
Did you, I just want clarification, I may have missed it. Did you say that the county commissioners, we could also stipulate whether they are elected or appointed, or you're just referring to the other positions?
No, what's called the row positions.
Okay.
Sheriff, county coroner, those.
Dave,
Yes, Phil.
you know, the 3 different commission setups, whether it's 3 or 5 or 7, basically the same. They are the legislators and the executives. There's a few more people so they can shuffle stuff around, but basically that's their job. The big difference to me is between the executive and the council manager. And if I recall years ago, the executive is strictly a political position. That person, male or female, has pretty much all the power, subject to a certain overview by the county commission. The council manager was really intended to bring in this paid professional who brings a certain amount of professional expertise and kind of tone down the political aspect of that office. But again, both those set up a distinction between an executive and a legislator, divided between a person and then the actual commission themselves. So I think at some point, we'll need to decide, do we want those duties split, which would tell us which way we want to go as far as a possible government form, or we leave everything in the hands of the county commission, whether it's 3, 5, or 7, and make that decision as we gather information and time proceeds.
Yes. The one thing I would say is if we do not put in an executive or an appointed manager, it is, if we go to a 5 or 7 member commission, they can create a second subcommission of 3 members to handle the administrative function rather than the whole board. I believe Brian mentioned that the current 3 can create a single commissioner to handle that. So that would be an option also, to stay with the 3, appoint a single member of the commission to handle the administrative functions, or 5, appoint 3 people to handle the administrative functions, 7, the same thing. We can recommend, we don't go, we can recommend a 3, 5, or 7-member commission under any circumstance, whether it's just the commission or an executive commission, a manager and commission. We can still talk about changing the number of commissioners. Yes, Tamara?
Through the strengths and weaknesses that you were talking about, will there be included a cost analysis through that, or what about possible legal effects of terminations? I know some of these will, those elected positions currently will serve out their terms, but what about people who were hired underneath them? And does that mean that those people no longer have a paid position? I think we need to also look at the political effects of what could happen with changing certain positions or not changing positions. And then I know I'm using Phil's terminology, beat a dead horse, but even according to, our own Attorney General, the people of the state of Idaho, in creating the instruments of government that serve them, do not yield their sovereignty to the agencies so created. So again, public comment, what is the will of the people? And then how do we translate that into public policy? I don't want it just to be academic. I think we always need to incorporate the people and what they like, don't like. They may have some fabulous recommendations. But looking at all of it, not just strengths and weaknesses, but maybe a little more specific on what those could be, including terminations, cost, those kinds of things.
Some of what you're bringing up should be part of the discussion when we get into the later sections, yes. As far as public comment, I don't think public comment is going to do us much good when it comes to the statute.
Yes,
So what we're dealing with
get that.
tonight is really not subject to public comment. People can voice their opinions freely, I have no issue, but there's not much we can do about the statute. We're just looking at what the statute is, familiarizing ourselves with what we can do, not what we should do. Right?
Oh, I agree. And oh goodness, the feedback is awful. No, I agree. I just think as we get farther along, the strengths and the weaknesses, but a little more fine-tuned on that. I know the statutes are the statutes and we have to abide by the statutes, but the 3, 5, and 7 about the county executive, the county manager, how all that's done, and again, incorporating it even down to staff. There's a lot of people that are involved in this. It's not just the 6 and the county commissioners. I mean, you've got all kinds of people that this could ripple affect, and positive and negative. And so kind of looking at all of that, I think would be important, and maybe possibly public comment from them, from staff as well, not just heads of departments. That's kind of the just throwing it out there in the mind frame of how do we really have a really good focus starting point on what we're trying to do within the statutes.
Yeah. In my experience, usually in a corporate takeover, the lower levels don't really have to worry too much about their jobs. It's the managers that are under review to determine whether they're going to keep their jobs or not. So when you talk about staff, I don't think we need to worry too much about that, although we can just get into it and discuss it when we get to that level. If we decide that we're going to recommend, for the sake of argument, an administrator, then we can talk at that point, what does that mean? What's going to happen? Who's going to report to whom? Are we going to appoint, for the sake of argument, are we going to appoint the county clerk? If we do, what does that mean to the managers? You have a clerk right now, you have a deputy clerk, you have, I believe it's 5 department heads. Who's going to report to whom? What are we going to do with this?
Yeah.
So if you're going to appoint that function, how much support do they need? What kind of span of control should they have? There's a lot of issues that we can talk about when we get there. And that's why I think that's going to get very interesting when we get down to actually talking about what we're looking at as a recommendation. Yes?
Again, just a point of clarification. I don't think at this point we're talking about strengths and weaknesses. We're only talking about what is in the statute and trying to understand what each one of them means. So I think that we need to be careful with that terminology. This has nothing to do with strengths and weaknesses in the current discussion.
Yeah, at this time, we're not talking strengths and weaknesses of the alternates. We're not talking about a recommendation. We have not even accepted information yet. The only thing we're talking about is what the statute does allow, does demand. As we go through, as we take the people in, as we take our interviews, as we listen to what they know, what they think, that's going to be another matter. Once we have gathered the information, once we've gathered the evidence, that's when we really can start talking about strengths and weaknesses. Until then, I'm sorry, we don't know what we're talking about. We may all have our own opinions, but we really don't know what we're talking about until we gather that data. As Brian said, it is important that we recognize that we have the two final options, consolidating between multiple counties and charter, and we'll need to talk about those as well. But I think the odds are we'll stay with the other 5, unless we come up with a really great idea.
I'm going to miss that meeting.
The good idea? Okay, we've been beating this one for a while. As we said, beating a dead horse. Do we need to discuss the statute any further? I take that as a no. That means we now move on to the communication strategy. Basically, it looks like we have 4 functions that we need to communicate. We need to educate the county population. We need to inform them. The difference. I see education as being what we're talking about tonight. What is the statute? What can we do? What can't we do? It doesn't make sense for somebody to come screaming at us about we're going to go through and we're going to eliminate the county commissioners. We don't have that option. It doesn't make sense for them to come through and say we're throwing away representative government. We don't have that option. There will still be elections. There will still be representative government. So we need to educate them as to what it is that we can and cannot do. We need to inform them. When we start taking evidence and we've talked to people, whether it's the county commissioners or the department heads or it's anybody else, people who've been in these offices in the past are no longer in office. As we gather that information, we need to find a way to disseminate that in an understandable, manageable way to the county. We need to receive feedback. Once we have something that makes sense, as opposed to just the statutes, it makes sense for us to take feedback. If people say, wait a minute, I don't care that person is lying to you, that's not really their job, that's not really what they do. Okay, we can take that feedback. If people are coming in and saying, it's all true except, we can take that feedback. So, to some extent, once we're taking the interviews, a level of feedback, possibly just through email, might make sense. Whether we want to actually have public comment sessions at that point, or whether we want to wait until we're getting close to the end of taking information and then open it up to public comment and take them as interviews at the same way we're taking interviews with other people. Comment responses.
Dave, I have
Yes.
a recommendation that might work well for us. The airport, when we had a very contentious decision to make, we put together presentation boards, large boards with easels of options. Mm-hmm. And we met in 4 or 5 different locations throughout the county. And those members on the advisory board were present as well as staff. And people that came in, we tried a couple of different ways of handling it. People that came in were given dots, and they could go around and look at the different options that were posted and talk to us, and then they could put a dot on the one that they favored the most. Or in another case, we actually had a sheet of paper they could fill out. But it was an educational process, and it was very non-threatening, and it was really well received. So it's an idea we might consider.
Sounds like an excellent way of informing the people what we're doing. The final thing with the comment responses. How are we going to respond to comments? Are we going to respond to comments? It's my understanding typically comments are received but not responded to directly. FOIA requests are something that simply are going to be filled. If someone requests a document, if someone requests something like that, that's not within our purview to make any decisions. FOIA requests will be filled by the staff.
Right, well, it's also not something that we have to worry about. So it's not something that the commission has to do to fulfill those requests.
No, it's something staff will have to do to fulfill those requests, yes.
Sure, but why do we have to worry about it? Staff's going to take care of it.
Staff has asked that we put comment responses in tonight. I have accepted their request.
Oh, okay, I see. I don't think a FOIA request qualifies as a comment.
I added that in because we're talking about comment responses. It's my understanding that typically when comments are made, say there's a matter before the county commissioners, they receive comments via email. They provide those, staff provides those comments to the county commissioners prior to the hearing, but there is no formal response program where they even say, yes, we received your comment.
I recommend that we not respond to comments in general.
So,
And FOIA requests are not a comment in my...
no, FOIA requests are not a comment.
Now, I think if we are holding a public hearing and somebody is asking for information from us, like, when are you meeting next, or something like that, I think simple informational things, it's just a matter of courtesy. But if they're asking, what's your opinion on X, Y, or Z, then we can refrain from that, and it's an opportunity for them to comment, not for them to interview us.
Correct. Public comments are an opportunity to comment. Questions do not belong in a public comment setting. For example, if we were to allow that, one set of questions could eat up the entire public comment section, silencing everyone else who wants to speak. And we don't want that. So we want to open public comments to public comments. I've spoken enough about the communication strategy. Dave, do you have something you want to present on this, or how do we want to go on this?
I'd like to ask Nancy, who is an expert in this area. I do think, before I turn it over to Nancy, is that one of the things that is important, whether we respond or not respond to comments, is that we all need to be aligned on how we're going to handle emails that we may be getting to our email address. So if we get an email from somebody about a comment, what do we do with it? Do we send it to staff? Do we send it to everybody? So whatever the procedure is, we all have to know what it is and follow it. So I think having a little formality in that is a good idea. And Nancy has presented this as a concept of things we have to deal with. So I'm going to just turn it over to Nancy.
Yes, Nancy? No, I don't hear it.
I don't know. Oh, there we sort of. Okay. It's another one of those. So to clarify one thing, as far as BOCC standard procedures, our procedures when we do receive public comment. Nope. When we receive public comment, everyone gets, the rule in the BOCC office is everyone gets a touch. So when they email, we at least acknowledge receipt of every email.
I stand corrected. Do you want to move up to one of the desks and use one of the other mics?
Does the Idaho code give us the option of recommending getting a new sound system for the county?
The really frustrating part is that I tested these before the meeting today, and every one of them, I was singing, you missed it.
Sorry, that mic's not working.
These things. You want us?
All right, musical mic. So fun. And yes, we are getting the new system hopefully the week of the 16th. We had a call today that could change that date again. So that becomes one of the questions for this group is, you know, my plan would be to at least acknowledge receipt of all comments, and then short of that to, if they had specific questions, to direct them to the website. Right now, pending this meeting tonight, on the website, all I have put is a group email address that comes to BOCC staff. Now, with a lot of our advisory boards, with all of them right now, sans one, we do put the individual email addresses. I will tell you from working with the board on issues of great public interest in the past, such as the waterways issue we just had, it becomes very difficult when everyone is getting separate emails. When we are creating a public comment file for something like that, the only ones we put in are the ones to the group email address, simply because the staff time to go through, if all three commissioners were to send me all of their comments and I had to weed through and go, okay, I got one from each person so they get counted appropriately, and then maybe that one person sent in 5 different emails. So now I'm getting 15 emails from the commissioners. The staff time was a little overwhelming. So we can put all of your individual email addresses on the website. We can leave it with just the group email address. It's not a right or wrong thing. It's kind of more housekeeping than anything. As far as the handout, this was just something to get conversation going. And what I did with this communication plan document was sort of laid out some different audiences that we may want to be reaching, how we might reach them, what kind of documents might be sent, what kind of media might be used, what venues. So the first section, you'll see there are 2 publics, and that is because really we sort of do serve 2 publics. There is the old media public and the new media public. And they don't actually have a lot of crossover. So it's something that, like the last. You know, we talked last week a little bit about media releases, news releases, which I think have a very important purpose. But the people you're going to reach with things like newspapers is one segment of the community. Then from there, you're going to have, and I think I've covered in there things like audio releases, video releases, blogs, podcasts. Do we want to look at Twitter, Facebook, Nextdoor? There are so many options available. We can make all of that happen for this group. So it's to get you to thinking about that. We've got the media listed separately on there. They are a separate audience in what they may be interested in. We have the BOCC. As you move forward through this process, I know there was mention earlier about periodic updates to them about where you're at in the process, certainly as you get closer to a recommendation. As you determine, okay, the charter form of government, we have now officially said we're not going to look at that. That may be something you would report to the press or the board. And then the employees of the county, I got to thinking about that to your comments earlier. These are people who could be affected on a daily basis by the recommendation made if it were adopted by the voters. And so that may be, it's a group you can reach with different messaging, such as the employee newsletter with permission of the board, things like that, polls that could be sent to employees that might be a little different than for the public. And that feedback, could be valuable as well. So looking again, as I said, and ultimately what this really comes down to is the question of, if you start looking at all the different audiences, if you start looking at the goals and strategies, is it something that on top of your goals right now, looking at the optional forms of government, is this something that this group wants to take on? Or would that be a potential subcommittee to create, to take on this function and then report back in all of your meetings and get direction on what messages you want put out there? You've got inward facing, public comment, public hearings. You have outward facing, and again, that education information. And then you've got the feedback. So there are a lot of different parts to this. There's the framing of messages, which are different depending on the medium. We could go down a very deep hole looking at the proper way to do this. And ultimately, it is up to this group to provide the direction that you want to go, that you think would be most effective, and what is most important to you. Is it more important to reach, when I drafted this, I'm thinking varied age groups. That's very important because you want to engage, young people in the community. We know that elderly voters tend to show up at the polls. So, and you reach them very differently. So those would be all of the things, and hopefully that document is a good start to your conversation on this.
Quick question for you, Nancy. If we were to hold meetings, informational meetings, outside this location, do we have the ability to stream those live, or would we only have the ability to record and present those on a recorded after-the-fact basis?
My initial thought on that, we would have the ability to do things like Facebook Live from a venue. There is also a particular person here in town we have worked with before who does mobile broadcasting. That could at some point become a budgetary item to discuss with the Board of Commissioners if you wanted to go that direction, but I do think it would be something available to us.
Okay. Questions, comments?
Yeah, I'll say one thing, Dave.
Phil?
I don't think for a while we're going to exactly have a huge number of emails coming to us. But regardless, I think any email that's coming from the public should go to the general box, to the county office, not to us individually. Worst thing that happens is we start replying individually, and I'm saying one thing and Brian is saying something else, and we're creating confusion out there. So I think we need to control that without limiting what people can get to us. And the only other thing is we probably really need to consider how we want to message, because we need to be sending the same message no matter what medium we choose to use. Otherwise, again, we're just creating confusion. People read Facebook one way, they read Twitter another way, and all of a sudden two different opinions on basically what's supposed to be the same information. So I think we need to really be careful to limit any kind of confusion, because this is confusing stuff, perfectly honest.
I agree wholeheartedly, Phil. It's important that when we provide information out, that it is consistent and it is accurate. We don't want any misunderstandings. We don't want to sow confusion, particularly. We want people to understand what it is what we're hearing and understanding, and what we're talking about here. So, yes.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to just first piggyback on what Joan said about when the Planning Commission had the comprehensive plan update, policy update. That was a pretty big event for us and a lot of feedback from the public. But before we even started the project, we ended up spending a considerable amount of time coming up with a plan. We actually had help from community development, had a consultant that actually helped do it for us. and come up with a plan. We did exactly what you did at the airport. We went out and we had big posters of all the potential revised policies. We had road shows. We stood with the public answering their questions at that and got a lot of good feedback. You know, based on the amount of workload it took to get a small thing like this, that the comprehensive plan was, I think this is much more complex and many, many more stakeholders. And even though we don't have anything to say right now, starting the education process earlier than later is a good thing, just to explain what we are doing and what we're not doing and to provide an avenue. So I would suggest that we do establish a working group, a subcommittee, whatever you want to call it, of people that may know a little more about the concepts of what works for our community than maybe some of us do. Come back to us with a plan, and then we can just simply, you know, be acknowledging what it is, and then over time, the plan will adjust based on as we get closer to a recommendation. So I think that's what I would like to suggest for discussion, and have one more thing for Nancy to do, to have Nancy potentially be part of that group that at least help coordinate it. And it could be made up of people from this group, or it could be made up of people outside this group, because we can create a subcommittee with people from the outside of this group. So that's just what I wanted to recommend.
Go ahead.
David, I lost some of the thread of what you were saying. I apologize. In establishing the subgroup, could you tell me what would the function be that you were describing?
More of us come up with a strategy. Should we be using Facebook? Should we be using different type of vehicles?
Okay, so communication.
I'm sorry, I apologize. Yeah, it's just communication.
Sorry, I drifted. And,
No, that I didn't clarify on that. It's just.
I thought for a minute it was going to be a subcommittee to come up with the alternate form of.
No. I wouldn't give that to anybody.
Sorry, I drifted for a
moment. I think.
Are you volunteering, Brian?
No.
Yeah, I think our focus is going to be tough enough to try to come up with all these different options and have like some of the discussions like Tamara talked about and others about impacts on people and cost impacts and capabilities of even hiring people to do some of these roles and all that. And I think our time is better spent doing that and letting another group concentrate on helping us communicate so that when we do go out and speak to people, they have a better basis of understanding what they're looking at. And then when we do have a public hearing, that we will have a better way of responding to some of their questions that they may have or not have on that. One of the things that we did do, and I'm not proposing this because I don't think I have the capability of doing this, but when we did the comprehensive plan, we literally got hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of emails on the comp plan. I took each and every email and put it in a report and summarized it by policy type. It was over about 150 pages. It took me more time than I probably ever did for a project at work to do, but then the Planning Commission actually had one document with every comment. And then the public was told, we read every one of your comments, or at least some of us did, and it was there. And then at our workshop, we actually reviewed the document and went over every comment and decided if we wanted to go and implement the recommendation or not, and if not, why not? So this would be probably undoable, but a concept where the public has an understanding that we just didn't take their email and put it in a box somewhere and never be read by anybody goes a long way. You don't have to agree with the public, but you have to respect their comments.
So, in the nature of the work that I do, which is on behalf of governments, I'm continually engaged in public comment periods on federal decisions, selecting matters on a record. And so there is a public period for comment. The agency that I represent would typically after a hearing at which public comment was entered in the record, whether it be written or oral, would take that information, they would compile it into what we call a responsiveness summary, which is basically a table. And they do along the lines of what you said, which is they would categorize the type of comments according to the subject matter it relates to. And then the reviewer of those comments works with the folks that are developing whatever decisional document is to come up with responses to each of those comments. Many times it's a general one, and it can just be kind of a same comment, or there are many comments in the same genre, and one response covers them all. Sometimes it's more individualized, but we call it a responsiveness summary or survey, and you just lay it out on the table and do it that way. Now, I don't want to suggest in any way that that's what we're doing on a day-to-day email receipt from the public. No, those are comments, and they're heard. However, I don't know what the study commission wants to do, if anything at all, and along the lines of, as we approach that point where we're having public hearings, information sessions, and you're actually collecting public comment, whether it be written or oral, compiling that in a responsiveness summary, categorizing it, and then responding to it. And then that becomes an attachment you hang on the back of whatever the study commission's recommendation is. Typically, this is what I do in a federal court when a consent decree is pending, in which the public has the ability to comment on by statute. And so this is used to this. It's a bit overboard because I'm dealing with federal statutes that are very particularized. But it's something to contemplate here, and I think it fits in with what you're talking about as a subgroup or something like that, where you've got a staffer who's collecting all this. Sorry, Nancy, I don't know if that's you, but and categorizing and working with the commissioners to come up with responses to those. But ultimately, it could hang on the back of whatever the recommendation is as an affirmation, if you will, that the public was heard and responded to, and yet here are the recommendations. You can't please all the people all the time, but you can at least listen.
Excellent. Based on what I'm hearing, we have two issues that we can discuss. I'll just deal with them in order. The first one that came up was the email addresses. It has been suggested that we can either put all of our email addresses out there for the public comment, or we consider only a centralized BOCC staff email address for comments. I know my position on that, but discussion?
Like Phil suggested, I think centralized is the best.
Centralized.
I agree with that.
It looks like we have a general consensus. Let's just do a quick poll. For centralized. Okay. It looks like we're unanimous that we want to do a centralized email address, Nancy?
And what I will do for this group, I will talk with our IT team tomorrow, because that could still come in. So to let you all know, the reason you did not receive individual emails as part of this group is because there is no way to give you a KC.gov email address without breaching the security of our system. What I can do, though, is ask them if they would create a single email that would be a group email address to this group separate. The nice part of that is when we do get into public comment periods, we could literally pull all of those comments to that. I will tell you from experience, there is very little chance that your individual email addresses for this group, I mean, that's still a public record. There's very little chance that those won't be used. If you do receive individual comments related to the work of this group, if you could send them to me and copy that group email, that will help us capture them and make the legwork much easier. And I'm going to go make a crown that says staffer on it now, Brian, because of you, and I love that. So thank you for that direction.
Okay. And I think that we all agree that if we do start receiving stuff, we need to get it into the record to send it to that centralized address. So, second issue was the issue of whether or not we create a subcommittee. believe David's advice is sound. I think when we're talking about, and this is strictly to create the communication plan, not to deal with the content, but the process. I think putting together a subcommittee to look at the process of the communication is a sound one. I don't know exactly how long we need to give people to do that, maybe a couple of weeks. And then to have them report back to this body on what they think the best plan would be. Alternates, and let the body decide. Any comments on such a suggestion? I will take silence as assent. I don't know. That can be a dangerous thing legally, but I'll take it anyway. In that case, who would like to volunteer, or do we have any volunteers who would like to be on such a subcommittee?
I would like to suggest that we hear the names of individuals that aren't necessarily part of this group who might have that expertise. I'm happy to contribute to this process, but I am not the most tech-savvy person, so I would not have the big picture. I'm happy to do any kind of legwork, but I would need to be advised by experts.
Do we really need to be tech-savvy in trying to set up the plan? We're not talking about us actually creating the
Right,
web pages
well,
or so on.
You're giving me more credit than you should. Tech-savvy in the sense of even, I mean, I can read this and I know what all of these are, but I specifically am not out on social media. That's a choice of mine. And so therefore I am fairly ignorant about what they look like, how people use them. So if there are people here who use them all the time and feel very comfortable, then yes, we can create a subcommittee from within this group. But I'm not trying to shirk work. I'm just not an expertise when it comes, an expert in terms of social media, by choice.
I understand that. I concur entirely with you. I'm not an expert on social media. I don't participate in it either. But I did not hear any volunteers within this organization. Are we going to have to go outside to get people for this?
I could start with a volunteer, and it won't be me. I have to emphasize, prior to coming here, there's not a soul in this room I knew except for Dr. Zayo here. So I have no axe to grind, but when we met the first time and discussed the different things that we did, I know my social media skills are comparable to my age, minimal at best. The only one who really demonstrated any kind of skill, and I remember him specifically saying he was involved with LinkedIn, there's a gentleman sitting right over there named Kirk, so I think he may have more skills, so I'd defer to you to provide some guidance here, Kirk, if you could.
Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe I tend to avoid, I don't have a Facebook account, for example, so I do tend to avoid it except for work purposes.
I think I look at this slightly different, maybe I may be looking at it wrongly, is that I don't see it as being tech-savvy, as being communication knowledgeable. How do you communicate? And I think what may be a good approach is Nancy knows what's needed and who are the people within, maybe some of the alternates here would want to do it, but we're going to be busy. And the purpose of the subcommittee is really to take that burden off of us to develop the plan. So maybe the approach we could consider would be ask Nancy to come up with some ideas of who to be on it. And then we could, if anybody wants to be be part of it, I'm sure that'll be fine. But I just think that our time may be better focused on the things we went over today.
I don't see Luke here tonight. Am I just missing him? Is Luke here? That's quite all right. He's not required to attend.
Well, he knew we were talking about communication, so he decided not to come. He was afraid of being delegated.
Since he didn't show up, I will volunteer Luke to be our liaison to some of the more technical, more social media aspects. Hopefully he'll be able to give us a hand with that. I believe he was offering to help. And it's my understanding he has a podcast. He does a lot of this social media stuff. And as someone who does this from the younger generation, I'm sure he could provide us a lot of help. We can contact, I will have to rely on you, Nancy. We can contact Luke and see if he would be willing to assist us with that.
This is awful. We did have another member of the public that, with your permission, I do have a business card upstairs. I could reach out to that individual as well who had already offered that. I will reach out to some communications professionals that I know that might be willing to walk hand in hand with me as far as the plan goes. And I would ask this group to be open. While I don't think you would have to be tech savvy to do this, I could see this group emerging as, again, in the interest of sharing a single message, that this might be a good group then to, have a liaison at these meetings, find out what you want your message to be, and then that would ensure that no matter what the medium was, that group may have someone who writes great newsletters, great articles, podcasts, and that will be consistent. So that could be something to think about. And I had one other point that I've forgotten. So, but I will put that together this week. And
Okay, just one comment to that. I believe we were talking about a subcommittee for procedures, for processes right now.
Right.
I believe what you're talking about is a subcommittee to actually be providing the data, the information output.
but, just for you to think about this group potentially morphing into that or having that group later, because the more research you do, the more information you'll have to push out to the public.
Yes.
And I think that could get, I think you will get a lot of public comment. And then this, again, could be either this group or another group like this, a group that could start getting those questions, and instead of just replying to emails saying we received it, it might be, okay, so that answer is on the website at this point. We address that in a blog post, here you go. So they're still sharing your previous messages. It's still that consistent single message. But having the time to dedicate to that. And at some point, if you decide to go that way, we could even sort of put out a call to say, okay, members of the public who are interested in this, is there anyone who, would be interested in backing up those efforts and just sharing the message we are sharing? And that's a great way to get the word out in the electronic age. So I will reach out to IT this week about the single email address. I will let Luke know that he has been voluntold. He will do cartwheels and begin putting together a list of potential people. And same thing here, if any of you can think of people you know who could be interested in that first portion of looking at the communications plan, or if someone reaches out to you this week, let me know, and we'll take it from there.
In the interest of this process, this subcommittee to develop the plan should be something that goes very quickly. We really shouldn't be waiting until perhaps after the 23rd or 30th to put that to bed. So as we're going on this, if we have suggestions, if we have people that we want to bring in, talk to them, see if they're willing to help. But it's something we need to do reasonably quickly. This is not our primary focus. We can't spend a lot of time on it. The plan is important. I don't think it's not, but it's not our primary focus. So let's put this to bed in a reasonable length of time. Dave?
Dave, I would say it's not our primary focus, but I do think communications is a central plank to getting any kind of knowledge out to the public. And if we have, like Nancy's talked about, a messaging that is consistent throughout the whole process, it's important. And, so I don't want to say we need to be doing it, but I don't want to minimize the importance of communications, because we could do a fantastic job, but this is not, but if nobody knows what we actually did, it really will not be productive in my mind. So just There's a difference between us doing it and how important it is.
I agree wholeheartedly. It's important for us to get the information out there. What I'm talking about right now, saying that it's something we need to put to bed quickly, is not the communication itself, it's the communication plan. What are we going to do? We bring Luke in, he's got capabilities, he's very familiar with social media. We bring some other people in that know social media or that are familiar with print media, et cetera. We get their recommendations, and we create a plan. We should do that fairly quickly. Once we've got the plan, then the actual implementation of the plan is something that's going to happen on a regular basis, and we need to have a consistent message out there, as Nancy said, and provide that so that everybody, young, old, tech-savvy, not, has access to it. Yes, Joan?
Dave, would it be appropriate then to set a deadline for the plan to be submitted?
I think it'd be reasonable. I'm not sure at the moment that we have enough information to do that. Do you generally feel that we have enough information to set a deadline?
I think it would behoove us to talk to Luke first. He might actually have a better understanding of what would be entailed.
Not arguing with that. So
in this discussion, I just want to add one more thing that
yes,
sometimes I'm not disagreeing with creating a subcommittee, Dave, or anything, but at the same time, I'm looking at a document in front of me that was presented tonight that says Communications Plan Template. I mean, isn't that in part the plan? It looks pretty detailed to me about, you know, it broken down into process updates, town halls, articles in the newspaper, polls and surveys, newsletters, and next to it is a description of what you do next to each of them. Seems like that's kind of the plan. It's a matter of who's going to execute on it. So maybe that's Luke, but don't we have a plan on this one 8.5 by 11 piece of paper without the need for subcommittee meetings and weeks?
I guess the definition of a plan we probably haven't defined what that is, because it's not only the tasks, but it's the themes that you want to communicate. What are we communicating? What are the themes that you want to be communicating? It's those types of things, not just how, but what. I'm not saying the actual messaging, but we want to be saying that public will have an input, and it's important for public input. There'll be a process for them. Here's the process. What are those themes? That's what really takes the time, I think, and I don't know.
Okay.
The primary, I would hope this would be a good basis.
Can you approach a microphone, Nancy?
Very carefully. So, I do think that that could be a good basis, that document, with incorporation into the schedule that was provided last week. I think that'll be an important piece of that, as well as, you know, as David said, during different phases of this, the messaging could be a little bit different. I think that we can get a pretty good idea what that may look like based on, you know, placing that against the established schedule. But I don't think it will take very long to build this out into what you're looking for and have a pretty specific idea of how that'll work. And one of the challenges of getting the right people to work on the plan and potentially later execution is the fact that as far as communication goes, this is really somewhat boring, because what this group will be sharing will be very, very narrow to the facts. And I think that will be critical to the messaging, is this idea that it's just what was discussed, and it'll get into a gray area as you start interviewing people who have opinions. And so the messaging will have to stick to that. We have interviewed these former electeds, these former study commissioners, these current electeds, you know, and we'll be sharing what we learned from them, but in a very factual way. And so I think that's one of the challenges of this particular plan, but I don't think it will take very long to craft up against the schedule what we should be doing when thinking about things. The advantage of getting a few people in a group is what Joan did tonight and said, wow, what if we did these presentations and you know, what if we kind of took a traveling road show? We took some things here, we did the sticker boards, which I think is a fantastic idea.
just a few people to brainstorm a few of those specific types of outreach. And I'm willing to bet that within 2 or 3 meetings, depending on what happens with that 1 week of potentially meeting or not, this could be, as you said, put to bed.
Sounds reasonable. Further comments? Nancy, we don't seem to have a lot of volunteers here for a subcommittee. If you could put out the feelers and see what you can find outside to provide us with assistance, I would be happy to work with them at their convenience.
Okay, perfect.
I am retired. I can meet with anybody, anywhere, anytime.
And don't think it'll take that long. We don't need very many people. We just need the right skill set. So I will start reaching out tomorrow.
Good. With that, I believe we've resolved that issue. The final item would be the agenda items and the date of the next meeting. Next meeting should be the 9th. And Nancy, who do we have up on the 9th?
Tamara's just tired of this.
Sorry, Tamara, you don't get a microphone.
I can't tell you how much I can't wait to have this project done. I spoke today with Jerry Mason, who is a member of the 96 Commission, and he is open to coming in at any of your upcoming Wednesday meetings. I have reached out to Mike Anderson, who I learned was not only in the 96 Commission, but is apparently a former commissioner. I will be reaching out tomorrow. There was one other, Bob Schramm, I believe it is. He is a real estate agent here in town who is apparently a member of the 96 Commission. And I thought I would also reach out to Tom Taggart, which is not a name that we had discussed previously. Tom was a previous county clerk who left the position as clerk to become an administrator under the Board of County Commissioners about the time that the study was done. So if that sounds like a good starting lineup, I think we could get 2 to 3 of those people next. And I'm not sure you would get much more than that in a 90-minute period.
No, 2 to 3 sounds reasonable. Sounds like you have not been able to make contact with several of those people at this point, though, right?
I have 2 that one I spoke with today, the other that we've been playing phone tag. I think that will be very doable, so I'm pretty sure we have 2. It wouldn't surprise me if we have a 3rd. So
Okay.
we could set a tentative agenda item to fill in extra time if we did only end up with 2.
Well, 2 or 3, I'm not dissatisfied with that issue. I just want to make sure that we will have somebody here if we set this up for the 9th, since we were trying to decide tonight which group we're going to have.
Would there be any thought, if we have 2 people coming, to potentially have one of the commissioners come in as that 3rd person and get that started?
I'll throw that one to the floor. I don't have any problem with it. If we only
That
have,
seems like a reasonable fallback. If we need more time with that particular individual, then we'll ask him to come back on a continuance.
so if we only have 2 people to come in on the 9th next week, we will probably be looking at bringing in one of the commissioners potentially to fill out the time. Is that everyone's understanding of what we're talking about now? We will be bringing in 96 commission members, prior commissioners, to discuss it, and we will be filling out, if necessary, with one of the current county commissioners.
Nancy, can you repeat the names of the people?
One was Mike Anderson, Jerry Mason.
Do you have a concern, Brian?
I was just going back to that framework that I put together. It's not a set in stone. I was just looking at, we flipped those 2 meetings around, the 6-2 and the 6-9,
Right.
and we were just chatting about that. And so you're going to have some former commission members in, and then it sounds like, we've read the study commission recommendation from 96, 97. We know about the 2012 kind of ballot measure that was put up. Is there any sense in doing a very quick synopsis of that for purposes of just a primer for the public to understand what those things were, refamiliarize ourselves to the degree it's needed, and do that in like 10 minutes, and then have in those commissioners. In fact, that might trigger some things that they remember about that era when they were serving and lead to facilitate the discussion.
Makes sense to me. Any
I don't
comments?
know
to
that we need a presentation. I think the executive summary covers it in 5 paragraphs.
Yeah, those are pretty good documents. Excellent documents.
This is the executive summary. So, I mean, we can cut the history stuff out.
Right.
Recommend.
This was the 96-7.
Yes.
Do we have any interest also in any of the county commissioners coming to talk to us, possibly if they are around, as to why they did not act on the results of that study? Is that a possibility?
I have built out a list, which I will give to Bob tonight, of former elected officials who were here in '96. One of those is very, very easy to contact, and I could reach out to them as well as someone potentially to come in as the 96th of the commission. But regarding the commission study, if this group wanted to think about, it might be helpful for these folks, if there were specific questions you're thinking of, if you wanted to forward me some ideas for questions, they could start formulating their responses. I will tell you, Mr. Mason asked me if I could forward him some of the old documents to start refreshing his memory, and I will be doing that in the morning. I will do that for any of them that wish to come in, but having some of your questions ready might be helpful as well.
Speaking of questions, this initial list that we got of these 14 questions, were those directed to us just as help us to formulate our discussion, or was this intended to be part of the questions of people we're interviewing?
No, it's not intended to be questions for the interviewees. It is a structure for us, as I said at the time. These are the issues that we have to resolve. Everything we do, everybody we interview, everything we discuss really should be tied to trying to answer those 14 questions. We're not going to resolve growth. We're not going to resolve tax rates. These are not our issues. Those 14 questions: should we be laying off some of the administrative effort? Should we be electing or appointing these positions? Should we be consolidating positions? Should we be expanding positions? Those are our bread and butter here. That's what we're supposed to be doing. There are a lot of important issues that we're not going to be able to address because they're not ours. So if I understand what we came up with over there, Brian and Kurt, we have an executive summary that I guess we're talking about just reading into the record?
Very small.
Yeah, it's section 6. It's their recommendations. It's 3 sentences.
So it sounds like something very easy to read into the record at the beginning of the interviews. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. That sounds like a plan. Nancy, go ahead and try and arrange as many of them in as reasonable. If we can get a prior commissioner to talk about why they didn't want to put it on the ballot, along with a couple of people who were on the 96 commission to talk about what their recommendations were and why, that would probably fill out a good evening. Comments, objections to what I just said? Anything? No? Okay. That then means that that's the 9th. We will not be meeting on the 16th because they're going to be fixing our mics. The next meeting will be hopefully.
If that changes and we can meet on the 16th, I will let the group know.
Yes.
And it sounds like we have one member who needs to attend via Zoom next week, so we can make that available to any of the commission members who would like to attend via Zoom.
Okay. In that case, either the 16th or the 23rd, it would behoove us to plan on bringing in the current commissioners, I believe. Any issues there? Comments? Frustrations?
Would prefer the 23rd, the commissioners.
The reason that I'm saying that is I'm assuming that if we don't end up getting the mics fixed on the 16th, they'll probably be working on them the following week. Is that reasonable, Nancy?
I'm hoping so.
In that case, we should be bringing the commissioners in whichever week we are actually able to meet. If you want to hold off on the 16th and we can meet, then what would be our plan of attack? What would be the suggestion, Bruce?
Well, it's just from my understanding, the 16th, we were not going to have a meeting, so plans started to be made for that week to not be here. So now we're talking about being here, so it becomes a little bit difficult to start planning around these meetings when we start changing supposedly canceled dates.
I understand. Unfortunately, I'm not sure exactly what the problem is, but we're being told that the work on the audio on the microphones is now questionable as to whether it will be done the week of the 16th.
So just to clarify, it was late today that I got a message that a piece may be on back order that they thought was going to be here because that is the way of the world right now. So I am really, really hoping we're still on for the 16th, but I won't know until tomorrow. And I'll let the group know, and that maybe we can work with something that either to have a Zoom available if people can't be here, or certainly, depending on who it would be interviewing if we have standard questions. It's something any of the group members, I know Joan and I have kind of talked about it because of your airport availability, that there may be weeks she may watch the meeting on, the recording on YouTube as well, so we'll have that available.
As a matter of fact, next week is the advisory board meeting, so I will
9th?
not be here on the 9th, but I will watch it.
Okay. Other comments? So we will know tomorrow whether we can meet on the 16th or can't meet on the 23rd, possibly. We'll find a way to set up whatever it is we're going to do, if that's agreeable with the group. Okay. Tomorrow we'll find out. We will be meeting the 9th next week with 96 commissioners, possibly a county commissioner from that time period. And we will be meeting either on the 16th or the 23rd with the current county commissioners. Work up your questions. Submit anything you have to Nancy. Is that reasonable, Nancy, to have them submit questions to you?
I think that that's just fine.
Okay.
Next meeting, bring your own microphones.
What would be the time frame to make sure that they are submitted to you? When do you want them by?
Realistically, if we're having the 96, hopefully 3 people from 96 in next Wednesday, if we can let them know, I would think by Monday, even Tuesday. These aren't things they have to research. And in the meantime, once they've confirmed the date, I will make sure to get the documents to them so they can start refreshing their memories.
And as a matter of practice, I think that it'd be reasonable to come up with questions on the 9th itself, if that's what it is. Something they say may be triggering a question in your mind at that time, and there's no reason to say that, oh, well, all questions had to be in 2 days ago. Sorry, I can't ask that.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I don't see having a real deadline on the questions. Just for Nancy's convenience, try to have them to her a day or two early.
Well, yeah, I've been in situations where you get just blasted. I would have liked to have had a little bit more time to kind of remember from that time frame. So just more respect for the people to give them as much time and opportunity to prepare.
Of course, that's reasonable.
Just an idea of what kinds of questions this group may be thinking.
Nancy just said, give people an idea of what kind of questions they might be asked. So are we settled then on the next 2 meetings, with the one proviso being that the date of the second meeting may be up in the air right now? I understand, Bruce, you may have made plans for the 16th, and if that's the case, you can watch it after the fact on YouTube, or you can Zoom the meeting or what have you if it turns out that you can't be there.
It was only a preference, that's all.
Oh, okay. That's fine then. Any other items on the agendas? Okay, we'll consider that closed. Do I have a motion to adjourn? It's only 7:30. Might be getting out of here too early. We have a motion from Kurt and a second from Brian. Do we have anybody who opposes the adjournment? We'll ask it that way. We have no nays. We are adjourned.